So I remember being absolutely rocked by the 2013 TED Talk from Joe Ehrman, who was a former NFL football player, the author of Inside Out Coaching, and the founder of the Inside Out Coaching Initiative. And I was absolutely rocked where he was challenging all men. I was a coach at the time of young men in high school sports. And he was challenging all men, though, men in sports, coaches, and athletes to think about these three words: be a man. Those three words, be a man. And his point was the context on which these three words are said to boys and young men, especially in sports, is almost always a message of toughen up, stop with the emotions. Now, Ehrman back in 2013 was ahead of his times in his call to action for us to come up with a healthier definition or vision of masculinity, especially in the world of sports, which is responsible for so much of the socialization of young men. Now, in the last 12 years since that TED Talk, it's clear that men are struggling. When you look at the statistics or even just the headlines, you can see that men are struggling to treat women with respect when it comes to all these incidents and cases of physical and sexual violence towards women, especially in sports. We also look at the other statistics around young men or men today, and we see that 3 out of 4 deaths of despair, drugs, and suicide are male. More young men are living with their parents than with a partner. Young men report having no friends. That's continuing to rise, the amount of young men that are reporting to have no friends. I think it's up to nearly 20% now, which is almost a 10% rise in the last decade. 2/3 of the top 10% of high school graduates are female, and 2/3 of the bottom 10% of high school graduates are male. Unemployment is skyrocketing among men aged 25 to 34. Those statistics continue to rise. And as Richard Reeves discusses in his book Of Boys and Men, young black men are more at risk than any other group in the States. Now, rather than give you more doom and gloom, though, today, we've got a fantastic guest to talk about masculinity in sports and how we as coaches can help be a part of the solution. Kip Ioane, founder of Teams of Men and a 22-year-old veteran of NCAA basketball coaching, is now entering his second year as the head boys basketball coach at South Salem High School. His work through Teams of Men, though, centers around helping coaches of male athletes build environments rooted in emotional fluency, accountability, and a reimagined version of manhood on and off the court. Listeners can explore his tools, t-shirts, and mirror training book at teamsofmenllc.com. Now, in part 1 of our conversation, we're going to dive into the concept of the man box, the rigid set of societal expectations that can leave men feeling lonely, angry, and isolated. You're going to see how Kip explains how coaches can use their unique platform to challenge these harmful norms, not by adding more to their plate, but by just shifting their focus. We discuss the power of vulnerability and mirror training, which encourages self-reflection and self-interrogation. And you're going to learn how small changes in language and a willingness to say, I don't know, can transform team culture and build true brotherhood. This isn't about winning more games. It's about helping young men become better leaders, teammates, and people. And that's what we're all about. So welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nurbin, and I'm here with my co-host, Betsy Butterick. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. Kip, I'm excited for this conversation because I think you're a lot like Betsy and myself. You know, you've been in coaching, you've got a basketball background, and yet on your journey as a coach, you started to see different challenges, different problems out there, and you said, hey, I want to step in that space and do more. So can you just kind of give our listeners a little bit of a breakdown of what it is that brought you to do this work with Teams of Men?
Yeah, no, I thank you both, JP and Betsy, for the space. And it really was one of those, why am I not sleeping? Right now, JP, I've heard you talk about this. Like, what is keeping me up at night? I got a head coaching job at Division III men's basketball when I was 29. So I thought I was, 3 championship seasons away, Betsy, from the Lakers. Just going to be real easy. And that hadn't happened 2 or 3 years into my journey. And some events happened, some gender violence incidents on campus at the D3 I was at. That were staggered in such a way that they really coalesced in a 2-3 month span, coupled with some incidents that were high profile in Salem, Oregon, where I live. And I kept getting calls, whether it was alumni, boosters, parents we were recruiting, my own staff, like what the heck is going on there, Kip? Like what? And I couldn't answer besides, well, it's not my guys. My male athletes on my basketball team, they didn't do it, which was factually accurate. But I also knew the coaches of the programs whose men had made choices that they didn't want. And they were great coaches. Like they were good people, high integrity folks that wouldn't want this. They weren't advocating for things like this. So I hadn't done anything different. I was just the luck of the dice roll that my guys had made these choices, and that really I couldn't sleep. You can ask my wife. I was asking her, like what do I do? Because if me just saying, "Hey guys, don't do this," was enough, we'd never turn the ball over, right? We'd never miss shots. Right? Just Betsy wouldn't have to
That'd be
practice,
so nice.
right? Hey,
Yeah.
we don't have. Hey, wait, on this read, make the right one. See you guys later. That wasn't it. So I walked across campus, and at the time, the Gender Advocacy Resource Center, the director was a woman named Carly Roner, who's still a great friend of mine to this day. And I said, Carly, I don't want my guys making these choices, but I don't know how to do that besides just telling them no. And I know that's not enough because I know these other coaches did the same thing. And she said, well, what are you actually willing to do? And I said, whatever it
Mm.
takes. Right. And that kind of started my journey in how do I bring up conversations? How do I make space intentionally over and over for conversations that really was rooted in prevention, like gender violence prevention, sexual assault prevention. And as I dove deeper into the work, recognized most of that came from man box ideology. Like, how are my young men, how am I rooted in this idea of this rigid form of masculinity that leads me to, well, I got to make this choice to prove myself to this invisible scoreboard of manhood. And so that was really the journey. And then, fast forward 12 years after of doing that work at the college level, when COVID hit, we didn't have a season. We played in the spring, maybe 5 games. And in that little open time where I had more time to think, I said, I can help more people than just my own, right? I think I've done enough. We've got enough proven ways to run this type of programming regularly to make it the actual climate and culture of a program. But I can help other coaches do this. So that was the genesis of Teams of Man in 2020. And that's really what I do full time now, while running it myself at now the high school level with freshmen through JV teams. We try to help coaches in athletic departments across the country build space for reimagining manhood with their players.
Mm. Yeah, reimagining manhood. I mean, I think you mentioned this word masculinity, and I think that how we define that, what does that mean to us? I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that are really struggling, a lot of young men that are struggling
Yeah,
with what does it mean to be a man? I mean, I look at the father of two boys, and I always thought raising boys would be easy, and then now I look at today's world, I'm going, oh,
yeah,
this is going to be really hard work. Because I'm
yeah,
seeing out there in the world, there's so many young men that are struggling,
yeah,
languishing, for like a better term. I mean, what do you think is really like the kind of the worst part about all this, or the biggest
yeah,
challenge? Probably the biggest. What's the biggest challenge in
yeah.
all of this right now for young men and out there
Yeah,
today?
no, that's a great question. I have two boys of my own. My oldest is a boy. My daughter's in the middle, trying to keep us all sane, and then my youngest, right? The real thing, and I credit Tony Porter from A Call to Men with coining the term the man box. And the man box, I think, is really what puts all of us, from those of us that are the fathers all the way through the sons, learning into this space of, oh my gosh, there's a rigid set of things that I have to be to earn my man points today. And not only is that like heavy to try to live to, I'm terrified that JP, when I get in a space with you, you're going to judge me because you're going to enforce those man box principles on me. I can't have emotions. I can't be associated with anything feminine. I can't fail. I can't do anything. I can't ask for help because then I'm not the quote unquote alpha. And I hope we have space to debunk that nonsense later. But all those things just really end up leaving me lonely, terrified, and angry, right? And I think that speaks to what we're seeing with young men is, where do I take this angst? Where do I take this worry? And unfortunately, the manosphere, the incel community gives them targets to blame rather than taking on the reflection of, oh man, this is some stuff I got to build a toolkit for, and I got to ask for help. They want the men to blame women. They want the men to blame the LGBTQ community. They want the men to blame the minority community. And we would never stand for that in sports. We would never let somebody miss a shot and then point and say, "Oh, the pass was horrible." Where we'd say, "Make the shot. It's on you. We have accountability." But for some reason, coaches, we stop application of the great lessons we teach for our skill set We don't want to apply it to breaking free of this man box. And that's what I try to do is show coaches, no, you're built for this. Like, actually, you're in a unique position with young men to take on the red pill community.
There's so much that's coming up for me. We were talking before, Kip, and so I have a twin brother, and we were raised in a gender neutral household, and I give my parents so much credit,
Yeah.
especially at the time, for being very intentional about doing that. And there's a recording of me when I was 2 saying I like playing with trucks and balls, right? And I think about elementary school and how we, both of us, were teased in different ways. I was the better athlete. And so the joke was always that we were switched in the womb. I should have been the boy. He should have been the girl. And this
Oh,
is coming from kids at the
yeah.
elementary school level, right?
Right.
Even when I came out to my parents in a very awkward way, saying, I think I might be gay. And this was at like 22.
Yeah.
My dad has a great sense of humor, and he said, Bets, we always thought one of you might be gay, but honestly, we kind of thought it was, your brother. And my brother is a very, he's a brilliant, like very compassionate, very emotionally literate, well-informed man. And just to see the gender dynamics that were placed on us as young kids, but then
Hmm.
reinforced throughout our life by
Yeah.
society, the
Yeah.
pressure put on my brother to be something that wasn't in his nature.
Yeah.
And then also the dampening down. You talk about, asking for help and expressing emotions. Same thing from the feminine perspective. It's like, oh, if you're asking for help, then you're weak. If you're
Right.
expressing emotion, then you're too emotional. You're not passionate. Men get to be
Uh-huh.
passionate. Women get to be
Uh-huh.
emotional. And
Right.
so just to hear everything that's coming up for men, especially young men, to have experienced growing up with a young man, but not myself being a young man. Like, so much of this for me is such an important conversation to have with all men of
Yeah.
every age. And what are we
Yeah.
unintentionally reinforcing? Even when you were doing that introduction, you said, well, it's not my guys, like
Yeah.
the vocal change. Like, why do we have to go deeper? Like,
Yes.
what's that about? Like, what does
Right.
that prove? Yeah,
Yes.
it's fascinating to me.
It's when thank you for sharing your background, and the reflection the work requires, I think, stops a lot of coaches from doing it. Because if I open up space for what I call mirror training for my guys, I'm okay with, a lot of times I can get coaches in our initial discussions to admit, like, oh, like, just like you mentioned, Betsy, I can see, Kip, why this has been heavy for them. But, I'm now the head coach at this D1 football program, or I'm here at this D2 basketball program. So I'm not really I don't want to reflect on myself, because all that rigidness got me to where I am, right? Like, oh, I wouldn't be who I am without the dog cussing and the screaming and the enforcing from the locker. When in reality, I like to push back, like, well, what if it's just your resilience that got you here? Imagine what you could be without carrying all that weight throughout your life. And so that's been I think young men are eager for this. Tying back into JP, what you see with young men, I think the angst and the worry and the recognition and the desire. I want this convo. I want someone I can go to when I feel like I'm getting all these pressures and all these rules about who I can be, when I don't feel like that at all. Why isn't it the coach? If we say we're building a family, if we say we're the one that we got to build, every coach say, well, we win because we're a family, or we got great relationships, or it's about authenticity. Okay, well, then let's talk real stuff, right? But most of the time it's, oh, leave it at the door. Well, I didn't leave my stuff at the door as a 32-year-old head coach. I came and bled out all over the team with my whistle of power, right? So I
Mm.
think this is all. I mean, there's so many places you can go with this, but I think that's a good thing, right? Unlearning is growing, and there's a lot we can do in the coaching community to help young men unlearn the man box.
I mean, that experience that you had those years ago, I mean, it was impactful, and yet you've still been in this landscape, and you still can observe
Yeah,
in the media and just probably in local high school teams that you're coaching
yeah,
in, where people aren't addressing this challenge, this issue. And I mean, I guess at the end of the day, probably a lot of coaches might be saying, well, that's not my
hmm,
responsibility. It's not
yeah,
on me to do that work with these young men. I'm just here. And that's, I mean, like, it's just, okay, here we go, JP. Now we got to do one more thing we got to worry about. But
right,
I just go, like, what's this costing us? Like, at the end of the
yeah.
day, like, what's it cost us to not dig in on this if we're coaching young men today?
Yeah, no, I thank you, JP, because that's exactly one of the pain points. And we all recognize the time demand on coaches. It's a true. Thank you for sharing the true reality of your job, but you signed up for it, right? And if you are unwilling to do this work, then I need you to put down all the cliches you spout about things that why your program's special. It's a brotherhood. Well, can it be a brotherhood if we don't really work on what it means to be a brother? If we don't really work on what it means to love someone to the truth, to be there for someone in vulnerable moments, well, then you please stop saying brotherhood, but they won't, right? And I don't want to say, so let me stop saying they, because I'm not a perfect example, right? My wife would laugh hysterically if she thought I was running around telling people that Kip's version of this is perfect. We're all masters in the making, so we have to stay students engaging. I'm the same way, because it's, JP, I think it's easier to slip back into the blinders on version of coaching because you do love your kids, and this stuff makes you worry about them. I can coach ball screen defense and feel like I have control there. I'm a little more worried to talk about choices he should make on Saturday night, even though that's what stresses me out, right? So it is a pain point. I think there is, especially at the high school level, I'm learning, where is my role with mom and dad, or mom or dad or big brother or uncle or grandparent that's driving this young man's life. Maybe it's less of preaching that coaches can embrace and more of giving your kids, your players, the toolkit to ask questions, man. If they leave me and they're curious, maybe we got a better chance later on because they're going to ask the why behind these rigid rules.
Let me play off of that for a minute, Kip.
Yeah.
I noticed your T-shirt. Tell me more what that's about. You're talking
So
about
it's
conversation starters. Say more.
absolutely self-reflection plus self-interrogation equals actual self-awareness. I think people are willing to reflect, Betsy. I know in sports we do it all the time, right? We'll watch film. We'll reflect on film, and we want to see the truth of what happened. I think that's a powerful, powerful thing. But then in sports, we're used to saying, why did you make that choice? Why did she pass it there? Like, we go into a little interrogation because we really want the truth of who we are as a team so we can use the practice week to get ready to improve. That's a good model. But we don't do that as humans enough. We might reflect, we might be transparent, right? We'll tell the truth in our minds about what happened, but we don't get into actual vulnerability of what really, like, what does that say? What does that mean about me? And then I worry about my guys. They say a lot, I got to be me, coach. Just got to do me. What if me's not what we need at the moment? What I want them to reassign, like, oh, I'm a person that embraces new. I'm a person that embraces growth. Then they can move through life in all of its requirements. If I'm rigidly me, even at 27 years old, it's hopefully a long time left, but you're stuck as that person. We got a lot of work to do. So I think this conversation allows people, hopefully with the t-shirts, and we have coaches that start these conversations. JP, remember you talked about, I don't have time for this. Well, if your coaching staff all wears this t-shirt in dynamic stretching on a football field, 4 or 5 guys are going to ask, what does that mean? Just like you did, Betsy. And at the very least, you get a touch point with that line of high knees into what self-interrogation might lead to. And then that's all you did that week. Good for you. You tried something new. Post every single sport I know, post practice huddle. And then we'll usually give 16 cliches and then break. Well, what if we just like, what do you think coaches are wearing these for? Partner up. What do you think that means? Would you wear that to school? What would keep you from wearing that to school? Now we get into some real, there's just different ways that we try to help coaches start these conversations. If they're not willing or don't have the permission structure with admin, to dive into, guys, this is how we're going to not commit gender violence in relationships. If you can't start there, you can start here.
So coaches, there's the not enough time thing, right?
Yeah.
There's the challenge of self-reflection, self-interrogation, to be the mirror. And then there's the added layer of, as a coach in any sport, male or female, you are hired to know. So talk to me, Kip, where is the power in not
so
knowing?
Good. Oh, Betsy, thank you for that. That is exactly, it's such a freeing moment, but it's maybe the number one fear in the pushback I get from someone that's moved by the stories they might hear here with us, or a story in their life where they saw this thing happen. And they're like, I don't want my players to do that, but oh my gosh, what if I stand up there and try to do one of these lessons or confront this issue and I say the wrong thing? I know the practice plan, I know the scheme, I know the game plan, I know all the adjustments. I know they want me to be the expert. And I've found that standing next to them shoulder to shoulder and looking out at, this created version of, guys, we're going after something together. Let me tell you how I messed up as a dad today. How did I get to that point? And that unburdening of that expertise allows you actually to become a human being, and you're going to get more actual feedback and truth from your guys when you let go of that idea that you have to be perfect. And it's an interesting dichotomy, right? Because we're used to the scoreboard telling us that we're less than, right? None of us would say like, why? Part of the good part about this profession is that thing tells me what I got to work on. But then we put that down. We're afraid of that in the stuff that actually matters. Like all of us, like, oh, hey, don't get too high off a win, too low off a loss, right? Scoreboard curriculum. But then we don't do that same thing. And like, man, I really wasn't a great dad today. Wasn't a great friend today. What does that mean? How do I go to practice? So I think it's when we put down the the requirement to have the answer, Betsy, we recognize we already have the toolkits and the lived experience to actually work towards behavior change. We do it every day.
Yeah, I love what you're getting into, and I recently, probably last year, read the book of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves,
Hmm.
and a good book, really a lot of good statistics, and yet, and it, I went and put like, we need to talk about this topic on the podcast, and
Yeah.
yet at the same time, I'm like, I need someone that can actually help us get to some like actual real solutions, you know?
Yes.
That book
Yeah.
kind of left me a little bit like, okay, now where do I go? And you're really getting into this thing that I think is so important because we talk about transformational coaching on this podcast. And what I'm hearing you talk about is really just the power of vulnerability with our players and having real conversations, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in your experience, maybe you got a few stories around what has happened because of that. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't actually like something dramatically like just really like super time intensive in my
Right.
opinion. It's probably just how we show up, and
Yeah.
just sometimes shifting the conversations we're already having
Yeah.
to ones that actually serve us more. But yeah, what have you seen the impact so far of this type of work?
Yeah, I think first of all, you got to get used to a delayed scoreboard, right? We just mentioned in that analogy, we're used to the buzzer goes off or the whistle blows, and you have an evaluation of how the work went. This takes some time, right? Because I had to learn in these spaces where maybe I'm asking partners to talk or small groups and then share, and you notice like, hey, these three kids haven't said a word. Are they? Am I like saying the wrong thing? Are they bored? Is it not connecting with them? Are they already in the manosphere? But then I recognize like, hey, kid, this might be the first time they've been asked to reflect on their dad, who they love, or this is the first time they're really deep diving that coach that they have so much respect for. But now in this conversation, this third time around, they're recognizing, man, maybe Coach Jones wasn't that wasn't the best thing he did for me. And that's heavy, right? That unloading of these past tropes takes a while. So, but what it also allowed me to do, JP, is maybe 6 months later, or maybe the next year when he's a sophomore and he does raise his hand in a team's amends session, there's that visibility point I can give him later. Like, hey man, Mace, I really appreciate hearing you today, man. You haven't talked before in there. Thank you for that was really brave. And then just walking away, but I can't reward that kid with playing time all the time. I can't give him more snaps. I can't give him more shots. But this is a place where I can actually give him visibility in. I appreciate what happened with you. You're sharing today. So there's that rewarding experience. I think you find yourself with more knocks on your door, with kids coming to the office when they're not in trouble and you're not mad at them, and suddenly they're there. I think this type of work makes you want to create that space even better. Like, let's get the hell out of this office. Let's be at the coffee shop Tuesdays and Thursdays on campus. So it's even more likely they show up to unburden some of their real life things on you. I think it also has allowed me throughout the course of time. Like I have a therapist. I've had a therapist for 20 years. Thank God. If he ever retires, I might go to his house every day. But it also in sharing and recognizing through the man box, sharing that, guys, I've needed help for 2 decades since I started having my kids. I've needed help. Suddenly, there's a lot of kids that will share with me, whether it's been high school experience or college experience. Coach, you said you did that. How'd you get that? How do I do that? How do I find that? Like I don't try to be a therapist, but I feel like I've been able to connect kids to resource paths that they never would even admitted they wanted to explore. And every coach in America would tell us their team plays better, free of angst and stress. Go out there and let it all hang out, right? Well, I'm more likely to be able to do that if I'm not in the midst of a 4-week depression spiral, if I'm not in the mix of overriding uncontrollable anxiety. And so I think all those things have, I wouldn't lie to anybody, JP, and say, well, if you do teams of men championships. No, I think I survived 15 years in college coaching at one place without a championship because we did this work.
Mm, mm. I love that. And I think so much of what I see in you is not just the conversations, but is the how you model. And it's
Ah,
not that you, and you keep coming back to like I think oftentimes we feel like, oh, I gotta be a role model. I gotta go be perfect. I mean, I think that's
Right.
probably one of the biggest mistakes I probably made my first few years as a
Same.
parent, was just like, well,
Yeah.
I gotta be this perfect dad. And it's like one of my best friends, he's been a therapist, school counselor. He's done some amazing work. He was a wrestling coach, just an amazing dude. And he shared something with me that, like, obviously we're modeling growth. You're modeling growth. We're having, hey, I'm not perfect. We're not modeling perfection. We're modeling how we work through our imperfections. But he shared this beautiful thing with me around just like his mother was dying, and then came to that point where she died. But during that process, I'm like, how did you handle that with your son? And he's like, honestly, one of the best things I did was let my son see me cry.
Hmm.
And that was like, oh man, like that is not my default way to want to try to respond. Like it
Right.
is like, man up,
Hmm.
show them like strength, like
Yeah.
show them like, and he would be willing to do that. I just think there's, you and my buddy there, like, I mean, you guys really call me up to a new standard of what it means to be, a leader in this space and to be a role model.
Thank you for sharing that, JP. And I think it's an activation of this unique platform that coaches have and you mentioned Boys to Men by Richard Reeves, where there's things that you have access to when you're 18 to 22 that you'll never have access to again once you leave the actual team space. Like you go to a place every single day to see your friends, right? To at the very least, see people you respect, probably love. You go to that space expecting to find a mentor that you put a lot of trust in, and you get access to that mentor who's trying to mentor, and then you go there expecting to be pushed. Like you're in the mindset to be pushed. Like most times, like, well, I know coach is gonna make me sweat today, but I'm giving him that small permission to drive me to better. Why aren't we activating that space? Right? Because it doesn't happen again. Like my therapist tells me all the time, go where people love you, be in challenging conversations, Kip, because it stimulates you, and try to be pushed. I can't just go find that, right? I can't just wave a magic wand at 46 years old and find that every single day. But when you have a team, those kids are that's their experience, and they're like willing for it. Teachers would kill for that space, that mindset. So I just think it's an opportunity we cannot waste, to drive more than, and I think it helps you get to where they are more receptive to your schematics and their skill sets as players, right? I think coaches sometimes get in a real binary of this or that. And I don't think you have to sacrifice either one of these, right? Like, unfortunately, I need somebody to win a national championship and say teams and men helped us communicate better. Then, we're all copycats, and suddenly, JP, you and I, we won't know what to do with the businesses, right? But until that, like, if I watch, if somebody watches what the Oklahoma City Thunder did in just one ball screen action, Betsy, suddenly everybody in America is running Zoom that way. But yet, if Dagenhall said, I really have a really close relationship with Shay, we share a lot of truths. Okay, so why don't we all sign up for truth sharing, right? Because that's hard for us as the coaches.
Let me ask you this, and again, Kip, like, this conversation is giving me life, but like it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, what you keep coming back to of, as coaches, it's not your responsibility, but you have an incredible opportunity to interact with young people in a space where these conditions exist, and a
Yeah.
conversation that may not happen elsewhere becomes more possible. And when people start having different conversations, different possibilities exist for them and for those that they share space with in all areas of their life. I'm thinking about a football coach that I worked with, and we were going through his slide deck for his quarterback meeting, beginning of
Okay.
the season. And we got to a slide, and on the slide it said, act like it's swinging between your knees. And I said, Coach, tell me about this one. And he
Hmm.
said, Betsy, I think you know what I mean. And I said, yeah, I don't know how this is helpful. Because even
Right.
if we just went tactical, if
Right.
something is swinging between your quarterback's knees, they're likely going to trip. Like they can't execute, with that kind of going around.
Yeah.
So the question I have from that is, what reinforces the man box? If someone is
Yes.
looking and saying, okay, I see that this man box is here, how do I open it? Is there a
Yes.
question? Is there an action that you would recommend if someone's curious about the
Yes.
structural integrity of that, but they don't
Yeah.
know how to approach it?
Oh, that's such a good. Thank you for also challenging that, because it is. You think about football in general. Just before I answer your question, my brother's a defensive coordinator at University of Nevada, so he's been in big time football for forever. And I tell him, like, you guys have it especially set up perfectly because football coaches will meet and meet and meet and meet, won't they? They'll be in a meeting space in a lecture hall for hours on end, right? And call it the norm and the culture setting. And then exactly what you said. Okay, so you guys meet for 3 hours a day at different times, right? Driving home. You're probably driving home more perpetration, right? You're probably driving home more of the norm of the nonsense we just talked about. So you do have the space. And actually, your space is hurting young men. And that's a hard thing. We've argued about this many times. The guy, I love him. Thank God we're close and we can have these real truths. But the man box, I think I'd start here with coaches. Is I'd ask them to have their young players. We've run this exercise, but they don't need me there to do it. What's a lesson in this sport, whatever their sport is, that you were taught when you were 6? Give me something that was like your dad, your first coach of flag football, basketball. What did they teach you? Triple threat. Let's say they said triple threat, right, Brad? Triple threat. Okay. Who was the first coach later that challenged that? Is that held true now that you're 22 years old? Well, blah, blah. Okay. Did that mean the person that taught you that before, like they were trying to do you harm? How do you still feel about that person? Oh, no, my coach was doing the best they could with what they had. It was awesome. I love coach. Awesome. Okay. Give me a lesson in manhood. What's something you were taught when you were young? So, JP, boys don't cry. Who taught you that? Oh, my big brother made fun of me the first time I cried. You think that's still true? And if it is, you have a lesson in how the man box is carried forward with him. If it's not, it's like, see, you can put down stuff that doesn't serve you anymore. You still talk to your big bro? Yeah. And you can still put down old lessons and keep the person. You sure can. And you probably can actually go back and tell them why you don't carry it anymore and help them. So I think that's a small dosage, right? But so often it starts from who was the modeler to them and what the lesson they took from it was. Because I know there's probably young men that played for me that took Betsy. You notice it like, oh, Kip raises his voice in conflict. And so I modeled that. Like, oh, coach got to his coach voice. Well, what if on my coach voice, I display that towards my wife when we're arguing about the recycling day, and my son inherently imprints like, oh, if I just raise my voice, the woman will listen. Like, what if like my coach voice doesn't serve me in the real world, right? So I think those are all. It never current events and your current reality never fail to give you curriculum, right? There's always a way to weave it into what you're living and what they're living.
I, I think another part of this conversation that I'm also fascinated about from the female perspective, and I have 2 daughters, so they're 2 and 4,
Yeah.
and my in-laws were visiting recently, and my wife noticed a pattern was that her mom kept saying like, "Oh, that's so pretty," and she finally asked the question, "Which princess do you think is the prettiest?" And my wife was like, "Hold on, actually, which one do you think is the bravest? Like which one do you think is like the funniest?" Just
Yeah.
like from such a young age in a culture that I don't want to say is historically unaware, but
Hmm.
just the way that things have been reinforced to
Yep.
the point that people are their intention is not to be harmful.
Yeah.
But we are not asking boys,
Right.
which prince do you think is the prettiest?
Yeah.
We're asking which do you think
Exactly.
is the strongest, which is the toughest. Like,
Yeah.
and so just looking through that lens a little bit. And then I'm also thinking about, like, I was sitting in a locker room, pro football team. They're working with the receivers and they're teaching them day one, like how to receive a kickoff. And the coach at the time said, pretend like you're a prude. You're going to put your hands over your, and I was like, "Whoop." Like, we can
Right.
structurally, tactically teach that same movement without
Yes.
the gendered expression.
Hmm.
So what are we doing? And
Yes.
and and what will it take to
Yeah.
shift this in a
Yeah.
way that does not undermine our power, authority, but actually
Right.
strengthens the way that we relate as men and women?
Hmm. Oh, it's Betsy. What you're articulating in all these examples, I think, is something I learned. Oh my gosh! And once again, it's something that I wish I could always like all these things we all learn. Like I want to make sure I credit the folks that taught me this because so often it's women, LGBTQ people that exist on the fringes that don't get the credit they deserve, and then just because I've served in basketball and I'm a cisgendered heterosexual man that with brown skin, I get into spaces and get to share their thing. I got them. Oh, I think it was Lena from A Call to Men in a Training, but she said once you know, you can never go back to living as if you don't. So once coaches embrace, or Betsy, like you talk, once you know and can actively see the imprinting of the man box, you will never not see it. And then you can challenge it. So I think that's one of the powerful messages is once you put on the lens, you'll be able to see. So you don't have to stress yourself, coach, into, oh my God, now I got to go read all these books. When am I going to read these books? When am I going to go? You just turn on the TV. You just listen to a broadcast. You'll just listen to your staff meeting and you'll see all the places you want to make change. And when you were talking about the punt receive, all of us as coaches have a verbiage and a language for our program, right? Like how you and I describe a rotation on defense might be the same rotation, but the verbiage we use to trigger that action is specific to our program, right? So this is an easy adjustment. Like, guys, we just don't say that shit no more. That's not what we say here. Because if that coach taught them a poor technique and used the wrong word, his head coach would lose his mind, right? They've spent 2 hours of meetings on what they call third down blitz packages. Okay, so now you know what else we don't say here now? This, and this. And when you activate the kids' power in that, suddenly they're your best enforcers, right? And so I think that's some of the small steps you're talking about that require coaches when we have these staff meetings and we have these staff retreats that we all do. What are we actually talking about? Are we just going over a practice calendar, or are we actually talking about where are spaces that we've noticed we can change words, we can change behavior systems, and it's got to start with us. It has to. I think that's how I would start to go down that road with you. And then also what I've learned, and JP, this goes back to a question you asked, where do you see the wins with this work? Because there's no real scoreboard. It's when the guys come to you with things. Like, coach, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking about you. Thought about man box. I was watching this broadcast and Richard Jefferson said this. That's some man box stuff, right? You're right, right? So then they're texting you. That's when you know, like they're texting the team chat. Oh, you're being real stodgy right now. That's when you know, like, hey, we're starting to see some movement, or at least some awareness and identity. Identifying some problematic stuff.
All right, that's it for today's episode. We'll be back with more from Kip Ioane. The biggest challenge he gives us today is to first focus on ourselves, to do this work ourselves. It's such an important challenge, and we'll be back with more in our next episode with Kip. Thank you to everyone who's listened into the Coaching and Culture podcast. If you found it valuable, please leave us a review, and most importantly, share it with someone else who might find value in it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox, our weekly newsletter at tocculture.com. You get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast.